Hi there, everyone. So today I'm going to cover the Tree and Shrub Lab, which is part of the unit Living Things and Ecosystems. Again, this is useful for students in Science 9, but in Science 10, there's some relevance here and some definitely some overlap with your grade 11 biology courses. So first of all, why are you doing this? Well, you're doing this to become more familiar with the species that are present. If you've made a study plot, you might want to look in the study plot for the trees and the shrubs that you find right there. So, first of all, I guess, what is a tree? What is a shrub? The definition between them is a little bit gray. From personal experience, you probably know that a tree is much larger than you, is upright, and has a trunk made of wood that survives from year to year. But how do you split that off from a shrub? Well, in general, shrubs are smaller. They often don't have that totally upright growth form. They're often a little bit more kind of leaning to their side. And they generally grow, if you are in a forest situation, the shrubs are going to grow underneath the trees in a kind of a lower story of the forest. The other concept I would like you to become familiar with is that of the biogeoclimatic zone. And that's a word that we can break up into parts. Bio means life. Geo refers to the earth. And climate refers to, climate, long-term patterns in weather. Biologists have divided BC into a number of what are called biogeoclimatic zones, just as a way of describing the the living things that are found in the different zones. Biogeoclimatic zones are given names that are based on the trees that are found in the forests of those areas. Forests are found in most of the ecosystems of BC. There's lots of trees here. And specifically, which trees are you finding? Well, the trees are talking about are the trees you find in the older forests. So if you say, cut down all the forests, maybe make a clear cut, the first trees that come back here on the coast of BC, it's going to be alder, and then a bunch of shrubs. Our biogeoclimatic zone is not named after those species. It's named after the tree species you find when the forest is mature. And knowledge of biogeoclimatic zones is useful because, well, there are a lot of jobs here in the forest industry that are based on your knowledge of plants and trees and shrubs. Trees and shrubs especially. Work in forestry often relates to them. So these are useful skills, but this also relates to the bigger pictures of the cycles. Trees are very large. They're a sink for carbon. So in that way, trees are a very important part of the carbon cycle. And of course, as you know, probably, the photosynthesis is a major energy transformation that happens in nature. So that's more of a Science 10 concept for you to be thinking about and connecting with your learning. Which biogeoclimatic zone are you in? Well, there's easy ways to find that out. Here's one example. I went onto Google Maps, which really you literally do a search for maps in Google and you find it. And I found Prince George just as an example community. What I did is having done a search for it, I then clicked this button right here, the zoom out button, until I could see all of BC. And what you see right there is for Prince George, we were left with this little red identifier like you've seen in using mapping programs before, probably. Then you can relate that to this. Notice the URL right here. I got here by doing a search on Google for biogeoclimatic zones. Notice the URL right here. This tells us this is a Government of BC website, for.gov.bc.ca, and then you can fill in the rest. Hopefully you'll find that if you do a Google search on it. This is super useful. There's all kinds of websites you can find, mostly government websites that talk about biogeoclimatic zones, although there are other sources. I like this one because you can scroll through the different zones. So for example, where is there alpine tundra? I click on that and we see, well, there's where alpine tundra appears on the overall map. This is the overall map right here. And you see, of course, it's color coded. Lots of stuff going on right here, and maybe this is all you need, is to be like, well, I'm in Prince George, and that's around right here, right there. I think I'm probably in the subboreal spruce zone, but let's make sure. Yeah, let's relate that back to this. Yep, that's around right here. You don't have to be correct about this. It's just useful to know for the purposes of knowing which trees and shrubs you might find. So right there at the arrow, we have Prince George is going to be the subboreal spruce zone. How about Vancouver? Well, that's the coastal western hemlock zone, as you can see right here, and that fits in most of the southwest of the province, except for some little areas of something called coastal Douglas fir, which I guess that applies to some parts of Vancouver and to Victoria. Those are your biogeoclimatic zones, and you can scroll through using Google Maps and this program right here to find out which one you're in. That'll give you useful information like, let's find out about coastal western hemlock. Then we can click on coastal western hemlock, as I did right there, follow the brochure, and we find the ecology of the coastal western hemlock zone. So this will tell you which species, which kinds of trees and shrubs that you're going to find in that area. And there's all sorts of other resources, but this is just one. Right here, this tells you a bit about the trees that are present. Your teacher might be able to give you more information about which shrubs you're going to find there as well. Right here, I have the handout that I've customized to the coast of BC. A lot of you students are going to live in and around Vancouver. This should give you some kind of idea about the trees and shrubs that you're likely to see. Around Vancouver, if you go for a walk in natural forest situation in a park, for example, Sitka spruce, western hemlock, Douglas fir, these are some of the trees you might see. And here, these are some of the shrubs. If you're working in a study plot, it would be really useful and relevant for surveying skills to actually count how many you see of each of these inside your study plot. So I'm going to give you an example of myself filling in this lab, show you where I went, where not to go, and what to do. So for when I did this lab, first of all, some materials. Really simple stuff. When you're outside, the knife. That's about all you need, although I would recommend you bring a small backpack to carry your specimens. You can do this just about any time of year, although doing it in the winter, I should say, when there's no leaves on the deciduous trees, that might be a little bit difficult. This would be best as a spring, summer, and fall activity. In terms of where you go once you're there, well, I went to a park which is next to some places with some houses. Here's what I saw when I faced the houses. These are all trees that have been planted within the past 100 years. They're old trees, but these are not trees that are native to the area. I wouldn't do this in your backyard or in a really heavily developed place because you might end up very confused because pretty much none of the trees that you see in this image are actually native to BC. They grow well here, but they're not native species. What I did is I went further down to the lake to a place that looked a little bit more natural. Here's where I chose to work. Are you going to find, when you go to a wild area and into nature, are you going to find only trees and shrubs that are native to BC? No, there's probably going to be some that you'll find that won't be. But it'll be a better bet if you go away from built-up areas and private properties. You're more likely to find a natural ecosystem. Now, I was in Vancouver when I did this lab, and so from that, I know that I'm in the coastal western hemlock zone. I harvested some species and then went back and drew them. Why draw them? I think drawing and sketching with color is a really useful skill. forces you to take careful observations of the specimens you see. And if you've taken careful observations, you're more likely to get an idea of how to identify them, how to know which species they are. So here's some of the specimens I collected when they were in the field. So there's that one. I guess this is red alder, by the way. We see over here, that's the Sitka spruce, and I'm going to get to that in a bit. And I brought them back home, and then here's an example of one that I then drew in color. It took a while to do this, but this is what I've got. Yeah, it's not up for me to tell you exactly how to draw. The only advice I would give you is don't draw what's in your head. Look at what you actually have in front of you and do your best to make a drawing of that. And at least with my own class, when I've done this activity with them, I'm having them use color because color matters for knowing which species are which. The drawings are really the core of what I like to see students do when they're doing this lab. That being said, it is often also really useful to actually say which species they are. The tables that I've created give you, are basically telling you that there's lots of species that are there, but that those are the most common ones. So that can help you, and honestly, you can simply do Google internet image searches to find out what these look like. But something I really like is to have what's called a field guide. That's a book that tells you the names of the different trees and shrubs. The Pojar and McKinnon field guides are super awesome. Your teacher may have access to them through their school library, but if not, that's fine too. There are also very useful plant identification programs that use what's called use artificial intelligence, something called machine learning, convolutional neural networks that are used for identifying an object from an image of it. I talk a little bit more about that in my mushroom lab, and you are welcome to do reading on that. Bottom line is, to do your identification, you can use programs like plant.id. Now, your teacher may have a class copy of plant.id, but honestly, they probably won't. If you do happen to have a Google account, you may want to use Plant ID, although that might bring up privacy issues, so definitely that would be something to ask your teacher. If you have a Google account, you will be able to do 5 free identifications per week using a Google account. Bottom line is you are on the website, you log in with Google, your Google account if you have one, you are on the website, you upload an image. If you take a good picture like this one right here, there's a good chance it will give you a correct identification. If it doesn't, don't worry about it. You're unlikely to be marked on whether your identification is correct, but it's just something that is useful to try doing. That's all that there is to the Tree and Shrub Identification Lab. So in summary, it's about identifying trees and shrubs, drawing in color those trees and shrubs to take really focused observations about what you see, doing your best to identify them and also to figure out, or based on, which biogeoclimatic zone you're in. I hope that you enjoy doing this lab, and I hope you found this video useful.